Okay, so the next item, which is one of our regular agenda items from the outset, is item 12. It's a special events ordinance, and this is a request is twofold. It's to adopt ordinance 4242, adding Article 1 through 6 to Chapter 22 of the Scottsdale Revised Code pertaining to events, and amending Chapter 47, Article 4, Division 1 of the Scottsdale Revised Codes pertaining to use of right-of-way. And the second item is adoption of Resolution 10381 to declare and document it, entitled Additions to Article 1 through 6 to Chapter 22 of the Scottsdale Revised Code and amendments to Chapter 47 as has been indicated, and B, to direct the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing and make recommendations to the City Council on the proposed repeal of the special events provision from the zoning ordinance. So, Cheryl, no, Karen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you tonight about the updated ordinance. We very much appreciate the time that you spent with us at the work study on March 16th, and that provided us much direction and suggestions. So I'll review the changes that we made to the draft ordinance, and that's based on the Council's directives and suggestions and following the work study session. And then I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor and Council, for questions and further discussion and action. The key issues and our areas that were directed and suggested included events organized or presented by the city, event criteria for events on city property, event frequency and duration, conflicts with Art Walk, the revised process, and then I'd like to review briefly the timeline that we're proposing. First, direction was to clarify exemptions for events organized in whole or part by the city, and we clarified this by adding a sentence to the draft ordinance that reads, an event for which the city solely provides funding or sponsorship is not an event organized in whole or part by the city for purposes of this section. Moving on to event criteria. During the work study session, we reviewed each one of these criteria, and as you know, the ordinance requires that the event administrator shall ensure that the event be conducted based on these event criteria. And tonight I'm presenting this in a little bit of a different format to illustrate how the event administrator would walk through the application and basically go through the event criteria by asking these questions. Does the event provide a unique organized activity or experience? Yes or no? Is the size, attendance, and the nature of the event suitable for the location? And I might add the duration, which is in the ordinance. We just couldn't fit on this line. Yes or no? Can event traffic be managed to accommodate expected attendance? Is parking provided to accommodate expected attendance? Are adequate security and emergency medical services provided? Are all temporary structures safe? Are restroom facilities provided to accommodate the expected attendance? Is there a trash management and removal plan? Is there a plan to pick up the site and leave it the way they found it after the event? Is noise managed to minimize the impact on neighboring properties? Is the aggregate impact of the event on others net neutral or net positive? And can the event be accommodated with the required city services? So if the event administrator goes through all these questions and answers yes to all of them, then the event can be approved. And we do have additional criteria, but before I go to that, I wanted to point out that during the work study, it was suggested that we eliminate the economic impact criteria language. We did not eliminate this language. However, we further clarified it, and that's Section 22.4, Item 9, which reads now, economic and other impacts to other properties, residences, and businesses are adequately addressed so that the net aggregate impact of the event on area businesses and residents is not negative. So that is the phrase, information that we put in there. So moving on to criteria for events proposed for city property. We had proposed that this language be in if there was two events that were wanting to do an event on city property at the same date. And it was advised by the council that we not do that, but the council did like the actual criteria being utilized and suggested that we put that in the ordinance so that when we're looking at any event that's asking to be held on city property, we would consider these additional 5 criteria. So all the criteria prior would relate to both private and public property, and then these 5 would be on city property as in addition. So it reads now, for an event on city property, in addition to the criteria in subsections A through C of this section, the events administrator shall consider whether the event, and it goes through the 5, which remained exactly the same as we reviewed them during the work study session. Now we get to the most 2 contentious items in the ordinance that pertain to event limits. And as the department director overseeing or working with the Tourism Development Commission, I need to inform you that on March 8th, there was a special meeting held to review the special event ordinance as we're reviewing tonight. And unanimously, the commission, let me read it right. So they recommended that the council not adopt the ordinance based on the duration and frequency. They feel that that should not be in the ordinance if all the criteria have been reviewed and met. And the other pertains to the art walk, which I'll review next. Their feeling was that one showing special interest to one organization and having the perception of potentially veto power. So I feel it's important that I let you know that information, and now go on and review the event limits as currently written in the draft ordinance, which is no more than 10 consecutive or 24 total days during the period of January 1 through March 31st, and no more than 30 consecutive days or 48 days during the calendar year. Regarding this, we'd gotten some direction according to the marked agenda on February 16th, and I'll read that, which says we should restrict, I'm still off, sorry. Where am I? Staff was directed to add language to address the duration and frequency of events, exemptions and provisions, and seasonal fee structures that would encourage events throughout the year. Again, that statement was taken from the marked agenda. And so going with the encouraging events throughout the year and keeping in mind that this applies to all events in the city of Scottsdale held on both public and private property, and that the event would already have met all the criteria in Section 22.4, including that the size, attendance, and nature of the event are suitable for the proposed location and duration, and that the event does not have a negative impact on area businesses and residents, we revised the duration and frequency to this 10 consecutive or 24 days during the period of January 1 and March 31st, and no more than 30 consecutive days or 48 total days during the calendar. We also are showing you what the current ordinance reads, as well as what we proposed at the actual work study session. So in terms of event limits to address conflicts with the art walk, there was a couple directives. One was that we remove the sentence under event criteria. The event does not unduly conflict with or negatively impact another event. In removing that sentence, we were directed to add language prohibiting the event administrator from approving art-related events on Thursday nights when an art walk takes place. It was further suggested that the language include the area bordered by Osborne and Camelback Roads and Goldwater Boulevard and Scottsdale Road. 2 points I wanted to make on that. First, if council wants to keep this language, the area needs to be defined, and that's why we used the only language that was suggested during the work study session. Second, the language states if it conflicts with the art walk scheduled on Thursday nights. And we would say, how would the event administrator determine if it conflicts or not? And our recommendation is that we would go to the Scottsdale Gallery Association and ask them if there was an event that applied, if that they felt that conflicted or was complementary. And based on their advice, we would then either deny or accept that event. The one last suggestion by council that I'd like to review was to keep this process simple and uncomplicated. One example of how we simplified the ordinance pertains to the application process. So events held on private property would either go through an administrative approval, very short process, no fees, or a simple application. Any event held on public, and in particular city property, would go through the standard application process. Right now, there's only one process, and it's a fairly lengthy one. Our goal throughout this process was to keep The ordinance is simple, and although that certainly has not been easy, for the most part, we believe that we've accomplished this. And I'd also like to mention that through the process of keeping it simple, staff updated 7 different items, and that was laid out for you in the City Council report you received earlier. So quickly, the proposed timeline, pending direction tonight. We look to March through June to create an online application, a payment and fee ability, produce an event user guide, and update our website as well as all of our processes. And then in May, the council will be looking at fees and rates for all the city, and that will include for use of property for events on city property. And in July, assuming direction tonight, ordinance would go into effect. And then in December, we asked that we could come back to you and provide an update of how things are going through with the process with a new ordinance. So with that, staff ask that the mayor and council adopt ordinance number 4242 and resolution number 10381.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the presentation. We do have some, excuse me, we have some requests to speak on the topic, so we'll go to those. And we'll start with Scott Eubanks, who has an additional card. So, Scott, if you'd like 4 minutes on it. And yes.
I'd like to start with stating one thing I think everyone can agree on. We're all sick of dealing with this special permits issue. I'm sure you're tired of it being on your agenda, and I'd like to see it move beyond that, and whatever we decide on get put in place so we can get back to running our businesses and lives. However, I do want to tell you the special events ordinance has turned out much larger than that. In many cases, to many people, it appears as though it's just the tip of the iceberg of some bigger issues that face Scottsdale and its relationship with its businesses, its business communities, and its tourism industry. I don't know what's below the surface. I've wondered if there a vision for downtown Scottsdale that calls for all new businesses and shiny new restaurants and buildings and tear down what we've got and start over and build a gleaming city of glass and steel and new things filled with shops and restaurants and bars and whatever cities decide they want. If there is such a vision, somebody share it with us. We can back off. Because there seems to be an unwritten commitment to something I don't quite understand. And it could be my ignorance. I own up to that. I don't know if there is another vision, if the city plan is so far different than what the 200 businesses that have made their wishes known to you, that they're in conflict. If there is a master plan that calls for a new city, again, let's go back to ground one and share it with us and make some converts. I'd like to say, do you know what virtually every city, suburb, and town in the United States would like to have? They would like to have Scottsdale's position as a mecca for art. Art. Every city in America has bars and nightlife and nice restaurants and hotels and motels. They don't have our nice, big fancy ones, our resorts. I do grant you that, and I'm proud of them. But they all have a museum or two. They all have performing arts centers. They all have live plays. They all have many of the things that we seem hung up on. They don't have 60 to 100 art galleries. You don't become an art city with 3 galleries and 2 museums. I don't care if you spend $100 million promoting it as an art city. Without the facts and the galleries behind it, you fall flat on your face, in my opinion. Well, we've got a wonderful reputation, and all of you probably had something to do with building us as an arts center, and we did, and the Convention Visitors Bureau did. Man, don't throw it away. If we're in conflict, let's get in conflict, because we want the same thing, or somebody's flat wrong. And if they're wrong, they need to be pointed out for being wrong. You know, I've heard in the reports and testimonies to the TDC, at their work session the other day, other cities don't have special events ordinance. And I'm here to tell you that's a bunk. There is not a city in America that hangs out an open, bring whatever you want to sign. They call them different things. They're not called special events. They're called permits, use permits. They're called zoning restrictions. They're called a whole host of things. But every city in America controls the quality of its events. Nobody can just open the doors and say, come on, more the merrier. That's ridiculous. You know, I've heard a lot of things. I've heard public board members in Scottsdale say some pretty nasty things about a large group of the business community. You shouldn't tolerate that, people. And if they deny it to you, then they've simply forgotten that everything they say at public board meetings and every staff memo they write and everything they put on Facebook is a record. And if they deny it, we'll go back and pull the record. That's not what public agencies do. The burden of statesmanship falls on the people in public service, not on the others. I just hope we can get it together. Breaks my heart to think that 61 art galleries have closed in this recession in Scottsdale. You know, where's the help we need? Aren't we part of the image you want? Aren't we unique and worth the extra effort? Seems to me like common sense says yes. I don't know. I've heard board members say, well, we don't want government in business. The same board members get grants from the city to run art businesses. The same people that said that get tax credits for their investments. Don't let them sit up there and tell you they don't want government in their business. Well, in summary, I guess I'm tired, and I think a lot of the other merchants are too, of being disparaged, treated like we don't matter. Bad things said about us by people on public boards. Where's this coming from? You know, we ought to be spending money. How much does the Convention Visitors Bureau spend out of this humongous bed tax advertising thing promoting the arts section of town? I had a little bitty art show Thursday night. Guess what? 16 people came from out of town, and I put them in hotel rooms. That's not a lot, but it's not all people from 2 blocks away coming. Anyway, just a plea. Saner heads have to prevail. And leadership's awfully tough when an issue divides us so harshly. But better research may be needed if you think other cities don't qualify the events that come to town. We should only bring quality ones that feed the image we want. And I hope we can work together, and I'm most appreciative of your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eubanks. I'm sorry. Please, we do refrain from booing or clapping, but thank you for your sentiments. Next would be Shears Shinnan. You have an additional card from Beverly Moore, and since I gave some additional time on the first, we'll certainly go to at least the 5 minutes.
My name is Shira Schneer. I run and operate Zulikins, which is a small baby and children's clothing and all kinds of baby stuff right on 5th Avenue at the junction of Craftsman Court. And I've been involved in this issue, and I would echo the thoughts that we're getting a little tired of it. But the problem is that it's going to keep happening, and we have to figure out how to make it work. Now, my question would really be, why are any of these events necessary? If you look at this slide, and I will say this slide comes from the City of Scottsdale statistics that obviously the city paid for, compiled, and printed, you will notice that visiting downtown Scottsdale, which amounts to Old Town and downtown, is pretty well one of the most popular things that anybody does. They don't book their tickets to Scottsdale because, ooh, there's going to be a flea market or a tent city or something happening on that particular weekend. Dining and shopping stands to reason. You're visiting, you don't have your own kitchen, you're going to have to dine out. I would hazard a guess that dining and shopping, much of that also happens on the third bar in Old Town, downtown Scottsdale. People are coming to us. We don't have to bring them to downtown Scottsdale. When they come here as tourists and long-term snowbirds, they come to us. So with that in mind, while all these events sound lovely, In this current situation between parking and traffic congestion, it creates an unsafe environment for pedestrians. The sidewalks are not wide enough, and there's cars pulling out all of the time. It is unsafe to put this many people in this area. So as I look at this, I realize that, okay, people are coming to downtown Scottsdale. They are coming for us, and I would include the galleries as merchants. They also can't eat and can't pay their bills if people don't buy their product. So they are coming to us, and they're walking the streets, and they're having a wonderful time. Not all that wonderful if you can't move because of the congestion of parking and moving traffic. And it's always people waiting until somebody might pull out and might not, and you just wait and nobody moves. The area isn't big enough to handle this, and it really doesn't contribute to the area. Pop-up and temporary retail can never contribute to a city's economy the way permanent year-round brick and mortar. So I believe I have to just click this to get to the next slide. Is that right? Where'd my friend Brian go? Just click? Okay. There is no question that money spent in local brick and mortar stays in the city or in the state. And if we're looking at this graph, this is put together by an organization that is across the nation called Local First. It is significant. So we are saying that temporary pop-up cannot support an economy such as downtown Scottsdale, a unique area, the way that our brick and mortar year-round temporary pop-up can in fact destroy us. My question would be, if every second merchant and gallery in this area closed up, would those same tourists indicated in your own studies that are spending time just nobody told them there was something special there. They woke up in the morning in their hotel room and said, let's go to Old Town, downtown Scottsdale. If there was nothing there, they wouldn't be coming. And I do not believe that anybody wants tent retail as their unique sort of city draw. When you're looking at how local money stays here, we should be working harder at supporting all of us in the downtown area, including the art merchants. Let the money stay here. We're looking at something that has happened in addition, this new variable that has been added to the mix in the last few years that nobody's addressing. We have heard people that are pro-event say, you guys just have to keep your businesses relevant. What they're not taking into account is we're also coping with the Amazon effect. Now, Macy's, Target, all of these big stores are having a hard time with online, so are we, and I would hazard a guess that the art dealers are also. Somebody walks around, sees pretty pictures, sees a type of sculpture, they like it, somebody likes it, they go home, they find it somewhere, generally Mr. Amazon, basically our arch enemy at this point. I cannot believe any city would really choose intermittent tent fairs instead of a thriving, walkable downtown. Now, if you really want the area to look quaint and approachable, and the interesting thing is that studies indicate that millennials use the word authentic, walkable, and approachable over and over again. Even the millennials are looking for this. So here it is. If we want to set up tents on the bridge, I think maybe help us to set up events that are non-retail, short in nature, and first and foremost, make sure the area can accommodate it. Do parking studies, find us parking garages, do something with the traffic, even something that doesn't threaten our businesses from retail. You close the street for a great big go-kart race. It was a disaster, an absolute disaster. Go somewhere else. If these events are such a draw in and of themselves, find another place that doesn't threaten existing businesses that are struggling so hard to deal with the online presence, and let it draw people there. That'll be great, but at least it won't threaten us. Now, millennials, now that I've brought it up, don't really seem to register in your own study. Look at the average age of people visiting short-term and long-term, and you can go through this entire, I didn't give you all the slides, but it's a fairly lengthy study. So while we're all talking millennials who seem to like the bars and the clubs and whatnot, in truth, the people coming and contributing to our bed tax economy and to our economy generally are over 58 years old. They don't really want the pubs and the bars and the whatever, and they would like to be able to walk unencumbered. Not being able to find parking and not being able to negotiate as a pedestrian or as just a car driving through that narrow area is going to turn them off. They're going to leave.
Cheryl, if you could please wrap it up, I appreciate
Okay.
it.
Well, I would just say that much like public buildings have a capacity, and you can't go over the capacity, it's unsafe. This area is unsafe when you get to this type of just intense. There's the vendors come, and the people that are coming, and the cars, and all, there's just no room for everybody, and it does prove unsafe. If these events are a draw, please let them draw elsewhere until such time that it can be proven as beneficial. If I might only add also, there has been the talk of the art galleries being asked to have veto. They're not saying they want veto over every event, but it would make sense in this struggling time to make sure that at least 60% of the neighborhood agrees with the event taking place in their backyard. That's not veto. That's just saying, please stop killing us. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And next is Bob Pejman, who has an additional card from Shirley Cardasso. And I would ask, Bob, that we were trying to keep it at 5 minutes, if you would.
Okay. I'm Bob Pejman. I own Pejman Gallery at Scottsdale in downtown Scottsdale on Main Street. I want to hit on two separate themes. One is events and hotels, and the other theme is the city that competes with its own merchants. On the first one, I was at a recent TDC meeting, and the comment was made, no other city has restriction on events, so why should we? And I found that comment rather non-true. So I said, let's go and check it out. First city I checked was Naples, Florida. That's a city I've heard mentioned by the Tourism and Events Department as some city that in some ways correlates with Scottsdale. It's not as big, but it's tourism, it's seasonal, whatever. And I asked the events person there, what is your maximum number of events? And the answer was 3 days. I said, well, what if I have an event and I want to repeat it over and over again? They said, you know what, you have to go to city council. And I said, wow, they actually know how this works. And unfortunately, we don't. And when I hear that the 24 days just ain't enough for some people on the council and some other people here, I really wonder what the agenda is. So what is the agenda? Let's examine it. You have TDC, you have TITF. They advise you. And TDC is made up of a lot of hotel people. TITF is some hotel people, some event producers. So all the advice is self-serving. And frankly, there's a major conflict of interest. Now, it's not illegal, but it's a conflict of interest because they want events to basically help themselves. And something is just wrong with that. I want to make another comment. When you look at large events like Barrett-Jackson, Phoenix Open, Arabian Horse Show, those are real events. Those events bring hundreds of thousands of people into Scottsdale. Fantastic, great for the economy. Those people fly in specifically for the events, and the heads are put on beds. Everybody's happy. But when you have an event like the beer festival on the bridge, are you telling me that somebody gets on a plane to come to Scottsdale to go to that event? Come on. I mean, it becomes ridiculous at some point. So the large events are great. Have more large national, international events that draw people in, no problem. But these little events, they move people around, and where do they move them to? They move them from the merchants to the event. So they have a negative impact on the merchants as a net result. And frankly, that just isn't right, and I hope that TDC and TATF starts to use the merchant base as the tourist draw for a change, because it's basically completely absent right now. So that's the first point. The second point, the city that competes with its own merchants. Now, I have heard certain council members make comments like, hey, if we make the event ordinance too complicated, we don't attract events. We turn them off. They won't show up. I'm going to propose a different concept to you. How about the way that you are treating this will turn off the merchants? So I don't want to be here, and quality merchants don't want to be here. Because frankly, I am tired and I regret moving to Scottsdale. I was going to move to Naples, Florida, and I chose Scottsdale. And every day now I'm regretting it because back then, if I knew what I'm going to be up against right now, to compete with all these pop-up venues, I wouldn't have done it. And in the future, you will have quality merchants that will shun this city. Why would you open here when you know you're up against infinity as far as events? So you're going to end up turning off some quality merchants, and you're going to lose all of that. And in conclusion, I would say that there are many cities that are very successful that use their merchant base, their downtown merchants, as the tourist draw. You don't have to bring all these events just to sprinkle them all over the place to be successful, unless it serves somebody's special interests, and I believe it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. Sonny Kirkley.
Good evening, Mayor Lane, Vice Mayor Smith, and council members. My name is Sonny Kirtley. I am the chairman of COGS, the Coalition of Greater Scottsdale. COGS members have attended every single public event related to special event ordinance update. The members of our board have had individual conferences with most of you. We have had special invitation to staff meetings with the Art District. So we've been very involved and followed this all along the way. And we have considerable input along the way. We were able to express our opinion. You received from us in the original packet, very detailed by section, by decimal point number, our recommendations for this ordinance update, and I hope that you've considered those carefully. Bottom line, the most important glaring thing that we have seen throughout this entire journey has been the frequency of events. Please do not just focus on the art galleries and their needs. This began some time ago related to Bar District problems on Craftsman Court. Frequency. How can it be a special event if it occurs 48 times in a year? We've talked about 24 times and spreading it out maybe by quarters. That becomes a little more special. I can have an event in my business and say, oh, we're going to give to charity down the road, so this is a special event. We're going to use the alley, the public alley. Oh, okay, special event. So frequency is important. And then the next thing that you see in the update, what's the impact on the high tourism season on the brick and mortar merchants? That's their high time. It's just like Christmas. Maybe 60 or 70% of their sales are during those holidays. Would you impact that with a whole bunch of events that suck the potential buyers away from the area? So frequency is the first big thing we noted. Public notice is the second. The impact on area businesses must be known ahead of time, and they must be properly noticed. I would think it would be a requirement that if a particular event was to occur, that vendor's website would identify it. When is it going to be? What are the hours? What is the impact? And that link is sent to everybody in that area. City of Scottsdale, by virtue of the business permit, should have an email address for all of the businesses in the area. So get those notices out before the permit is approved, before it's reviewed. That's only fair. Public property. That's my property, that's your property, that's your property. Use extreme care in this. We've been literally giving it away and even giving free electricity. Charge the market rate and keep that updated. We do not give away our public property. Look at our budget. We could use the income. Limit the downtown trolley route conflicts. That Marshall Bridge and our trolley routes are a big tourist draw. You know, I spent 8 years with the downtown ambassadors, the scheduling, the training and all of that, the feedback we get from the tourists is what fun to take that bridge route with that trolley. It's an ooh and an ah. Don't close that off. If we move into a waterfront special events ordinance, keep in mind that bridge is for pedestrian experience. Permit approval, who does it benefit? If the committee gets in 11 people that say, wow, this is great, and 10 people say, holy cow, that really affects my business, what criteria they're going to use to make a decision. The last item, terrific idea by staff, an events handbook. The question is that handbook a guideline? Is it enforceable? Are the criteria in there enforceable? If I come in for a permit, is all of the criteria have to be checked off before I get my permit approval? If not, if some of those are okay to let slide, which ones are forgiven? These are all important questions, and we hope that you spend time thinking about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny. Next is Jim Berdamus.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I am the owner, or one of the owners of Classy Jazzy on Fifth Avenue. I'm also the president of the Fifth Avenue Merchants Association. And our first store, Classy Jazzy, was on Fifth Avenue. For some period of time, about 3 years, we also had a store on Brown, on Old Town. So we're 9 years into it, very familiar with the market. And I have to tell you, it's very frustrating. Some of our best years were during the recession. That seems pretty ironical to me. And I think the reason for that is the main draw of the tents and events, as we call it, on the bridge. It changed the traffic patterns. The promotion started going over there. There was so much confusion, even with the people coming to town saying, you know, they're walking up the street and they're saying, where's the art walk? And the art walk would, because they called the bridge Art Bridge, now people were getting confused. Where's the action here? The tents drew a lot of our typical clientele during the prime time season. So as I look at this, I think it's a situation of priority. In terms of the city, I happen to scope the website, and it's published there what the city's priorities are for 2015 and 16. In bold print, it clearly states that, let me see if I can quote it here, provide strategic support of tourism and visitor events. Bold print. But nowhere in those list of priorities do you see anything about improving Fifth Avenue, the art galleries. You don't even see art mentioned in that. I think that's sad. I think that's really sad. In dealing with the Fifth Avenue merchants, we've made numerous requests to try to get some improvements, some maintenance, basic maintenance going on in our area. I assume you visited Fifth Avenue. You look at the lights, are almost embarrassing. The marquees haven't been touched. In fact, the lights are out. The banners are several of them missing. We've asked for planters, just that we used to have. These are things we used to have, just planters, flowers, to make the area appealing. And the answers we get are typically, well, you know, that's part of a big plan for downtown, and we're going to hire a consultant so that we get it right. And we're trying to, you know, we're trying to run businesses over there. We're asked to, there's no appeal on Fifth Avenue. Well, how do we have appeal if we don't maintain our market? We had a meeting this morning, and it was rather sad, because I don't know what to tell the folks. Now, we also discussed the possibility of having an event ourselves down there, and we're kind of planning the fall for the 60th anniversary. Now, from that, we heard, you know what? There may be some money for events, and I find that pretty ironical. We can't get basic maintenance visuals that are attractive, but maybe there's some money for events. I think that reinforces the fact that the priorities go towards the tents and the events.
Mr. Berdanis, if you could please wrap it up.
Okay.
Time is out.
You bet. Again, just to reiterate, though, the 24-day clause in here, I think, puts us right back to where we started, because if you're talking about 24 days and you go from January 15th through April 15th, that's 2 days a week. So somebody can park up on that bridge, Saturday, Sunday for 12 weeks. And I just think that's unacceptable. So I would encourage the council to look seriously at taking up the revisions that the three associations of Old Town and Art Gallery and Fifth Avenue recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berdanis. Next is former Councilman Bob Littlefield.
Well, you have a rare opportunity tonight to fix a long festering and big problem, and you ought to take it. I remember when I was first elected in 2002, all the time I was on the council, special events were a pain for the neighbors, they were a pain for the brick and mortar businesses, and they were a pain for the galleries. And it's sad that things had to get to a crisis proportion before something was done. But you know what? If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You should grab this opportunity to fix the special events ordinance and fix these problems. And I certainly hope tonight you'll make the modifications necessary to what the staff proposed so that you actually accomplish that goal. It's interesting to me, I remember some of the criticism of the update to the special events ordinance. Oh, it's just a bunch of whining gallery owners who are stuck with a Neanderthal primitive business model, and they're looking for the city to save them. Well, if you look at who's supporting the modifications, it's not just the gallery owners. It's the Fifth Avenue merchants, it's the Old Town merchants, and it's the Coalition of Greater Scottsdale. Those folks certainly don't have any personal dog in this fight. So this is your opportunity to do something good. The modifications that have been proposed by COGS and have been proposed by the Gallery Association, I support all of them. You'll notice they're pretty much the same, and there's a reason for that, because they need to be done. And one other thing occurred to me here listening tonight, especially to one of the earlier speakers who came up and he said, well, what's the plan for downtown? I can't figure it out. And the answer to that is what I always said, is don't listen to what people say, look at what they do, because then you're going to know where they're really coming from. So tonight, your actions will communicate to everybody, all the people who are here and all the people watching on television and all the people who are going to read about this. You're going to communicate to everybody what your vision for downtown really is. You're either going to go with the gallery owners, the merchants, and the residents, or you're not. And so people will know then that regardless of what you say, they will look at what you do, and then they'll know what your real plan for downtown is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Littlefield. Next is Sean Gillespie.
Thank you, Mayor, and distinguished council and staff. I'm here on behalf of some of the producers. We produce lots of events such as the Scottsdale Culinary Festival, the Italian Festival, the Grand Prix, Crush Brew, and a myriad of other events that bring in literally hundreds of thousands of people into the downtown area. They do produce dollars. These people spend money in restaurants, galleries. That bar graph is a lot of people coming in. I don't disagree with the galleries. I think it is a jewel of the entire valley that we have the art district. However, at the same time, we spent millions of dollars on a bridge, and if it's purely for just pedestrian access, that wasn't a very wise investment. What we need to do is look at both of these things coexisting. For example, I keep hearing, well, we're not getting any help. Well, the Scottsdale Culinary Festival donates hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Civic Center every year. In addition, it also donates several $1 million to arts programs valley-wide, including most of it right here in Scottsdale. So these are events that actually happen that bring dollars into the Scottsdale area. So what I would like to see is, well, let me go back to one thing. I did hear something that concerned me in the new ordinance, and that is I heard a mention that, well, if there's two events happening on a Thursday, we're going to go back to the galleries, and not to use the term veto power, but that is veto power. So if the galleries get to decide what's going on, then we might as well just deal with the galleries and avoid you and avoid staff. I'm not in favor of events that are there for more than a few days. I'm talking about events such as the Culinary Festival that come and go. But what you're talking about and what limits we're talking about do affect the wider area, not just the bridge, not just the gallery district. We're talking about an events ordinance that is citywide, and this has major impact. One of the other things that we have to look at is, I know they're like, I'm hearing send these events away, but these are dollars that are going to leave Scottsdale. And these dollars need to stay in Scottsdale. We do have cities that compete. We have the Indian Reservation that would love to get these events over at Talking Stick and Salt River Fields. City of Tempe competes for them. City of Phoenix would like to get these events. And trust me, they do try and woo these events away. So that's another thing I want you to consider. And then just on a whole different topic are the fees. I agree that there do need to be fees charged. But we're not comparing apples to apples. When we're looking at using, especially the downtown area, the bridge, and the Solari area, these are areas that you still have to accommodate pedestrian traffic. So it's not like I'm renting a soccer field out at Westworld. I have to accommodate people walking through my event, which means I have to bring extra security, extra fencing. And it's good because it keeps people moving back and forth. They can go to the galleries, they can go to other places, but it is not apples to apples. Also, you're getting double charged. Don't forget that that area actually belongs to SRP. So SRP does charge fees to use that area. So that is something to consider. There's a double charge whenever you're looking at using those areas. And to sum it up, I just want to say that I don't think events are the bane of downtown. I think if they're done correctly, it could work very well. It could help promote people coming into the gallery area, promote restaurant, promote retail. It can do all of those things if everyone works together, but if you simply chase it out, it's not going to benefit anybody. It's just going to benefit another city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillespie. Last would be French Thompson.
Good evening, Mayor Lane, Vice Mayor Smith, City Council members. I like going last. This is pretty cool. I was on radio several times. People call me up and say, "Hey, what was all that all about? What are the tourism board? Why are they trying to take advantage of the downtown?" I just want to say something about the gentleman that was just here. Kind of interesting because he brought up fees. He just said that they donate millions of dollars to whatever it is, and I'm thinking, well, if they're donating millions of dollars, then they could probably afford better, higher fees. Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, if you're donating millions of dollars, it means you got extra millions of dollars that you choose what you do with it. If the fees are there and they're fair fees and they're the even fee what everybody should be paying, bricks and mortars and everything else, they're still going to have a lot of money to be able to donate. The other thing that's happening is words are really important, and when I finally realized that they're taking the word special out of this, That means the city can have any event. It doesn't even have to be special anymore. It could be, I mean, you know, the bad words would be a dog and pony show, but you're taking the word special out. You know, Scottsdale needs special. We need special events. We need really cool events that bring people here that don't conflict with the other businesses. I have a business down the street from the Culinary Arts Festival and the Scottsdale Center for the Arts on Main Street. I'll tell you what, those weekends, I might as well just close my store and not even be there, because all the people do is park there, they go to those events, at the end of the day, they leave. Now, I like those events. I even go to them on my day off. I like them. Those are special events. But they still have a major impact on those businesses around them. That money is tax money. It's going to the city. I appreciate that. I say those are special events. Those are good events. 3 days, 2 days, that's not a bad deal. But you start having these tourism boards and stuff like that are saying, we don't want any restrictions on these events. We want to have them all the time. Their job is to try to do something that has nothing to do with bricks and mortar businesses. They're trying to make all this excitement with the low-hanging fruit. We can bring anything we want, call it an event now, and we can promote it through the hotels. We can put it through the website. You know, we had somebody just come to us the other day that went to the Phoenician. The Phoenician said, quote unquote, we don't send people to downtown anymore. The Phoenicians concierges are saying they don't send people to downtown anymore. You guys, the city council, that should be the worst thing you could ever hear, because the downtown's what built this city. And so the other thing that happens when you guys say that the galleries are going to have this veto, you're making it sound like it's for everything, a veto all over everything in the whole city. We would like to be consulted with the merchants in the downtown area about events that would happen on Thursday nights that would be strictly arts related. And that's wording that this city council put in. You're getting these tourism people are saying, take that out. Take out the time limit. So you really do have a hard job, and I appreciate all the work that everybody has put into this stuff. I've been here 19 years putting in hard work. I was late getting here because I was trying to create tax revenue and also income for myself. Your job is to try to make this city the best it can, and I think you can do it with special events, not events. I think you can do it with time limits, not no time limits. You know, it is a very tough thing, and I know you guys are going to want to do the best job you can, and I thank you for putting the time and effort into it.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That completes the public testimony on this item. So we've heard a great deal about it. What we have in front of us is item 12, and this is the special events ordinance. We've heard some testimony. We've heard the staff's representation of what is in the revised ordinance that is being sought to be considered here by us tonight. And so we do have some questions or comments from some of the council members, and we'll start with Vice Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. And first of all, I appreciate everybody who took the time to be here to comment, and staff for the work you've done on this special events ordinance. I think everybody is concerned, and the objective is all the same, to try to come up with a good solution that makes our city even better. It's worth remembering, I think, why we're even here, why we're talking about this. And fundamentally, it is because we do recognize that arts and culture is one of the foundations of our community. I think one of the speakers reminded us of that, but we shouldn't need to be reminded of that. The citizens remind us of that every time we give them a chance to speak on this subject. And so everything that we do should be trying to enhance that unique image that we have for the city and its presence in arts and culture. And we also have an obligation to increase tourism, to try to figure out in every way possible how can we make it the most interesting and attractive place to visit, and particularly the downtown area, which is in and of itself a visitor attraction. And by the way, if if it dies, it not only will lose visitors, it will also be a very uninteresting place to hold events. Events are held downtown because it is a place that visitors come. It is a tourist attraction. And so in every way that we try to promote tourism, we should try to enhance the livelihood and the excitement and the prosperity of downtown. We're also here because we confronted, I think one of the speakers said, situations where in bar areas we were having events that really defied the imagination of being a special event. They happened every week, and they happened in a way that seemed neither special nor event-like to some people. And then we got into the situation, we realized we were dealing with an ordinance that was 23 years old, and we hadn't ever addressed the question of what's the proper fee to charge for public land used, and were we inadvertently subsidizing one business to the detriment of other businesses? So lots of things brought us here, and I hope what we come away with is a solution that protects our image as an arts and culture community and also makes us an attractive place for events, special events in the future. I don't think any of us are trying to put up impediments to the creation of special events. We're trying to make the process streamlined, transparent, and in the best interest of everyone. And that's why the language of net benefit or net aggregate benefit exists in the language. With that preamble, I do have some questions, and I don't know whether they are for staff or who's going to want to answer them, but one of the things that brought us here was a concern about events that are primarily retail denominated. And I say primarily because almost every event is going to have a retail component to it. Maybe they're selling hot dogs, T-shirts, whatever. But those events which are predominantly retail events, we were told, would somehow fall out or not make it through what was described as the sieve last time. And can someone tell me how, if they don't fall out, how do we control them? If they do fall out, how do they do that? And I'll let just about anybody answer that.
Mayor and Vice Mayor Smith, that goes through the event criteria, going through step by step, and we are looking for events that are unique. We're looking at things that raise awareness for culture, education, entertainment, recreation. We will go through all the different steps of the criteria, and there was one other point. But that's really where it comes into, is that the actual criteria fleshes those items out. We didn't speak specific to retail, but we look at the event overall, the nature of the event. So if it was retail-oriented only, that would not be very unique, and it wouldn't necessarily raise awareness of culture, education, entertainment, or recreation. That would be how we would process that.
Okay, then while you're on that criteria page, let me ask you a question that I think one of the speakers addressed. There are on the slide, 8, 10, 12 different event criteria with yes, no to each one. Does an event have to pass every item? Is there anything such as a majority passing? In other words, you can hit 6 of the 12 but not the other 6, or is this, you must be everything?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Smith, we would go through the process, and if there were items that were not a part of the application, these would all be answered in the application. If there were items in there that were missing or we felt were not addressing what we were asking, we would go back to the event applicant and give them the opportunity to update that information or provide that information. But yes, the intent is that pretty much the 10 items that are in the event ordinance would be required of that applicant before we would approve the event.
So now, stating it more simply, eventually, before the applicant is approved, every item has to be yes. Is that
Yes.
the intent? What, unrelated question, but what will be the notification to neighbors? I don't see that specified in here. I think one of the speakers addressed that, but will we have a website, an email? How will the neighbors know that something is being planned that might impact them positively or negatively so that they can weigh in?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, we will do that through first the application process, because we do, while it's stated a specific way, we do require them to demonstrate that it is not going to have impacts to other properties, residents, and businesses, that they're adequately addressed. So we realize that events do cause impacts. We talked a lot about that at the work study session. But how are they adequately addressed? And that would be a process where we would ask them to get signatures and notification to the businesses, the residences up front before they actually turn in the application. We also have a process we already currently use, which is sometimes our event administrator will send out an email to a lot of different businesses and groups in the area of where the event is going to be held and ask if there's any concerns in that regard. It's our intent to add to our notification. We are working on that process right now. We are up to, I believe, 600-700 email addresses so that we can start the notification process through the city as well as through the application process. So that's how we're looking at that.
Well, I would encourage you to flesh this feature out in a very robust way. I would not depend on the applicant to respond to this. I think we've seen for several years what happens when you do that. It's like submitting references when you're looking for a job. You find 3 friends to recommend you. So I think an applicant is obviously going to find a few businesses that think it's a great thing, and other businesses may not know of it. So I want to see, in whatever form this finally takes, a more robust way of making people aware that something is planned and giving them an opportunity to respond, whether that's a website, a notification and response, or whatever it is. But I want to look for a moment to section 22-1, parentheses A, in the proposed ordinance. And that's where that says that certain things will be exempt from the ordinance. And in particular, I guess it's the ones that are, I said A, it's really section D, 22-2, section D, and it's saying certain areas, locations will be exempt from Articles 3 through 6. And 3 through 6, I think, are the ones that deal with filling out an application and getting a permit and so on and so forth. Now, my point is this. You are not exempting those other locations from Section 2 of the ordinance, and Section 2 is the part that deals with criteria. So they will still have to demonstrate that they are unique and that they are an activity, an experience, and the size is under control and the traffic is manageable and so on and so forth. Is that true?
That's correct.
How do you propose to enforce that? If you don't have them fill out a permit, you don't have them fill out an application, you don't have any enforcement mechanisms, how do you intend to make them comply with all the things that you have for the criteria in Section 2?
Mayor and Vice Mayor Smith, those facilities are listed because they have separate ordinances and regulations and applications that they utilize. So the intent is that we're asking those, and I know Assistant City Manager Brent Stockwell has been in contact with all the directors that oversee those properties about having that they would use those criteria when they're looking at events on those city properties, but the actual enforcement and regulation is through a separate ordinance.
So you'll intend that these criteria apply to those other locations and leave the application process and the enforcement up to them. I guess that's what you're saying. Is that right?
Mayor Lane, Vice Mayor Smith, members of the council. Yes, that's correct. The city manager is responsible for enforcing this ordinance, also responsible for enforcing ordinances in parks that preserve the stadium and the mall. So if council gives this guidance on what you want at events in those locations, then that carries throughout those areas.
Then sticking with the criteria for a moment, you have some definitions in the ordinance. One word that you use in the criteria, though, is that the event must provide a unique experience. Do you propose to have a definition for unique in the ordinance, or is this left to a reader's imagination, or how would we interpret unique?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, that we were actually looking at the English dictionary in terms of using that unique meaning, that it's special. I don't remember all the other parts when we looked it up, but it does refer exactly to the word unique as defined by a dictionary.
And do you have that definition with you?
I don't.
Does anybody in the room?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, special, one of a kind, or unlike anything else.
Special, one of a kind, or like anything else. I guess I would encourage that either in the ordinance or certainly in the handbook, we have clarification. And if it means giving somebody the Webster definition, that's fine, but I would not leave this to the imagination of an applicant. We had difficulty, as you're well aware, in the old ordinance with the term welfare, which was pretty ambiguously defined in its application. I guess the question was raised by one of the speakers, and I'll raise it again officially, and that is when you say the net aggregate impact, and I think you do that in 22-4A 9, I guess it is. You say that the economic and other impacts to other properties, residences, and businesses are adequately addressed so that the net aggregate impact is not negative. How will you implement this? One of the speakers said, what if 10 people like it and 11 people don't, or vice versa? Is it dollar weighted? Is it business weighted?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, right now that would go through the application process. First of all, we would make sure the user guide defines exactly what we expect them to do in terms of notification, and we would require them in the application to get signatures. We've not yet determined exactly how many, but the intent would be that we want to make sure that we are getting the advice from businesses, residences, and businesses need to be a combination of service businesses, general businesses, merchants, bars, restaurants, galleries, and so on, so that we get a diversified look at how those businesses in that impacted area feel about having that type of an event.
And you said, if I understood you correctly, you'll have the applicant do this. Is this, maybe I'm getting back to a question I raised before, of in what way are we going to hear from people other than the ones that the applicant has solicited for comments?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, we would require a percentage or number of businesses to actually sign the application. So that process we've not vetted out yet, but that would be part of the user guide. So the ordinance as it's written would regulate staff to make sure that those things are addressed in the application and that we look at those in the criteria. But we have not gotten very specific as to exactly how that would entail.
Well, I think it's maybe adequate for the ordinance to say that you're going to consider the net aggregate impact, but I would urge you quickly to give some consideration and maybe state it in the handbook of just exactly how this will be done and whether it's going to be something more than just the applicant's solicitation of responses, how you'll reach out to the business community and advise them what's happening. And then to talk about the next item, if you will, the elephant in the room, section 22-7, which are the limits. I can only tell you that when I spoke back in March at the work-study session that we had and urged you to take the proposed 10 consecutive days for an event or 24 days in total, and I urged you to spread something recognizing the seasonality. I did not expect you to essentially quadruple the number and put that same number in each of the 4 quarters, or which is, for all intents and purposes, what you've done. You have said in section 22-7A, you've put a limit of 10 consecutive or 24 days during the 3-month period, January 1 through March 31. And then you have repeated that it's no more than 30 consecutive days or 48 total days, which is the same thing we had in the 23-year-old ordinance during the calendar year. I don't know how the rest of council is going to feel about this, but I will tell you unequivocally that's not what I had in mind. Certainly, I think we need to recognize that most events are going to desire to be in the popular January through March 31 quarter. But I didn't mean to take the entire allotment and put it in that quarter, nor did I intend to stay with the same 48 total days for an event. And it really gets to the question of whether we're talking about a special event. Of course, I know we've struck the term special, but whether we're even talking about an event which is unique, and can it really truly be unique if it repeats itself 48 times during a calendar year? Can it be unique if it's 10 consecutive days in the first quarter and maybe, I don't know what it's going to be in the second, third, and fourth quarters? The intent, my intent, was that we attract events which are truly unique, and unique being in part defined as the frequency with which we see them. And if we see something every single weekend during the first quarter of the calendar year, it is not going to impress anybody as being unique. Maybe at this point I'll stop. I've weighed in on several items and I'll let somebody else to talk. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilwoman Clapp.
Well, since Vice Mayor Smith mentioned the, as he said, the elephant in the room last, I might as well just tag on to that. There was no intention when I spoke for us to increase the number of days beyond 24 either. My intention was that it would be 10 consecutive days, no more than 24 days, and to spread those days over 4 quarters. So, I mean, I'm willing to concede that if an event has to have 10 days, that the remaining 14 days have to be spread in other quarters. It can't all be coming in 1 quarter of the year. That was the intention, and I don't believe I heard any, some of the other people that have spoken on this past about no more than 24 days. I don't think I heard them disagree with that. So that would be just trying to be perfectly clear that I would not agree that the event should be 30 days or in a maximum of 48 days in a year. As has been stated already by the merchants and the gallery district, this would mean if you have 48 days, you can do 1 day a week for the year, you can do 2 days a week for half the year, you can do even more days a week over the course of a quarter. It's just not the acceptable way for us to view special events. To me, a special event happened this weekend, 3-day art fest, art-related event, not on a Thursday night, and it was for 3 days. That's a special event. But something that lasts 48 days to me is not a special event. So I'll back up after tagging on to Vice Mayor Smith's comments to say that The ordinance is meant, in my mind, to create some kind of a balance between the interests of the business community and the event producers and the tourism community, but it's not meant to negatively impact the business community. I believe it's my intention in discussing the ordinance, and it's my hope that we do what we say we want to do as a city as far as economic development, and that is to retain businesses in Scottsdale. And you've heard from some of the merchants that they're thinking of possibly leaving because they are not feeling as if they can be heard about this ordinance. And if we do not hear them and we do not understand their concerns about special events, then they're going to find a city that does understand this. As was mentioned, Naples, Florida seems to get it, that they don't allow an event to be any more than 3 days. And so some other cities, my bet would be, also see it in the same fashion. So we need to work on business retention, and I don't believe I'm seeing our economic development department pay any attention at all to the art galleries or the downtown merchants. It's all kinds of other businesses, but those people are saying we need some help, and I believe we should place some focus on them. So this special events ordinance has to focus on their needs as well as the tourism and the business community. One question I did have, though, that I don't believe that David brought up, and that was, you have said in the past that that your intention would be that there will be a canal bank ordinance, and that was something that I recall that I had asked for in the very first meeting we had about special events, is that we need to have an ordinance that controls the canal bank and the bridge, and that I believe that's something that's being worked on. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Is that being mentioned anywhere in this ordinance, that there will be a canal bank ordinance that will obviously then impact that area, and this ordinance would then not have precedence over that particular ordinance? Are you going to write something into this ordinance that refers to a possible canal bank ordinance?
Mayor and Council Member Clapp, we would need to come back and amend the ordinance to include the canal banks ordinance once it actually is written.
Once it's written
and approved
okay.
by council.
But that would be done.
Yes.
Okay. That is indeed a concern. Another thing that I was hoping for, which we discussed in the work study session, which we're getting, is the event guide, and I'm glad of that. I think it's critical. I do see that you gave us an outline. So, I mean, that's sufficient for me now to see an outline. I don't have to see the actual event guide in order to make some kind of a decision tonight. But will you bring that event guide back for the council to discuss when it is done?
Mayor and Councilwoman Clapp, yes, we will absolutely do that, and we would look to your input as well. And I would like to make a comment about the Naples, Florida. It's interesting because in there they don't have an actual ordinance that states a limited number of days for special events, but in their event user guideline, they do specify that you can only put 3 event days on the application per application. So you could not have more than 3 event days on that. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Okay, I pretty much understood that they have got a very specific limitation on special events in their application. And so, I mean, I think for those people who claim that nobody else in the whole country does anything like what we're trying to do with this ordinance, I don't believe that's the case. And I would also argue that we are a city that everyone wants to come here and have special events, as far as I can see. And so why wouldn't we want to put some limitations? If we were a city that were finding a dearth of special events coming to Scottsdale and we really wanted to encourage them, maybe we wouldn't put a limitation on it. But since we have so many people coming to us and asking for special events, then we need to have limitations, and not 48 days, because that is, as has been overstated by now, not a special event. It just becomes a recurring event that is not special in any way. Let's see. I had another question about the art walk, and it was stated by some people that there should not be any veto power by the art galleries, and as was said, I don't believe that. From my conversation with them, they're asking for veto power. All they're wanting is recognition in this ordinance that if there is an art-related event that's in the area where they are located, that it not occur on Thursday nights. If it's Thursday day, they don't care, as long as it's just not Thursday night. And I do believe that the rather arbitrary boundaries that were picked up last time as being from Osborne to Camelback, and I think it was Goldwater to Scottsdale Road, and that's what's in the language now. I believe it should be the entire downtown boundary. It should not just be a very, very small contained area. It should relate to the entire downtown boundary, which would be from Chaparral to Earl and from 68th over to Miller. Those are the boundaries that should be recognized for the art-related event that does not take place on a Thursday night that conflicts with Art Walk. That's my opinion. We'll find out how the rest of the council feels. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to bring up about this. The moment you've already told us that the retail-type businesses will be pretty much excluded by the sieve that you've put into effect, which would be the questionnaire. So I think that's important. So the major factors that I think we need to discuss tonight is the event timing and duration, and the boundaries that are going to affect the downtown art walk in particular. Those are the things, the two key things, and there may be a few other things we need to address as well. I'll let someone else speak.
Thank you, Councilwoman Clapp. Councilman Phillips?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, one, I kind of going along here in line with Vice Mayor Smith and Councilmember Clapp right now, so you're starting to get some kind of direction, I think. But if I may, I'd like to speak that, well, number one, I don't think I can speak better than the business owners and the gallery owners and COGS and them about our downtown and how important it is. But what I can do is honor their commitment to run a business and stay in downtown and fight daily 24/7 to make a living. And they've been doing that since Scottsdale's inception, and that's the reason why we are where we are today. And we can't just put them by the wayside for a bunch of fun, frivolous little events that bring people down here and there. If you'll indulge me, I got an email, or most of us probably did, and I'd just like to read it. And this person said, I cringed last evening while on Craftsman Court. A mature couple was walking down Craftsman Court, well-dressed and obviously from out of town, and probably on the way to a restaurant for dinner. The street and sidewalks were filthy, plastic cups strewn all over, dueling loud music from Rock Bar and Dos Gringos. Young people drinking and playing beanbag toss on the Dos Gringos street dining patio and hurling expletives. The couple continued walking on the opposite side of the street from this bar scene as if to reach Fifth Avenue as quickly as they could. Not that Fifth Avenue is any cleaner or more attractive, but maybe less noisy and without the foul language. I would be aghast if I were they, visiting Scottsdale and finding our streets, the surrounding facilities, landscaping in a state of rot with the look and feel of an old grungy town not worth keeping up. It is hardly an inviting experience for tourists, and when you think about how much money the tourists spend, it is a total disgrace. Downtown Scottsdale sure looks spiffy in a glossy advertisement. The reality is quite different. That's a very troubling email when somebody feels that way about our city, our downtown, our old town, something that we're supposed to be proud of. I think the bottom line is we need to cater to the tourists, the people that come from Germany and New York and Canada and Japan or wherever they come from, hearing about how wonderful Scottsdale is and the CVB that puts the advertisements out and covers the buses and trams in New York and, oh, let's come to Scottsdale. Wow, it looks fantastic to come down here. And then to find out it really wasn't the way we promoted it. So I think we need a special emphasis on our downtown and the brick and mortar businesses that would do that. Tourism is our bread and butter. And I hope our TDC and the TAF recognize that and recognize how important it is to real tourists, because these are tourists that, as the one lady pointed out, 58 and over. You know, they're the ones that have saved up all their lives. Now they can travel. And where do they want to go? They want to go to Scottsdale. And what do they want to do in Scottsdale? They want to check out the downtown they heard so much about. We have to make sure that these people are having a good time. The opposite is, are we going to compete with tourists and the others, which I guess you consider partygoers, or maybe curiosity seekers that come to these smaller events, walk around, party a little, have a good time, and go home, and don't spend any money. You know, this is not helping our major tourism draw, which is the lifeblood of our economy. Suzanne Councilmember Clapp, she mentioned no art-related events Thursday nights, period. I would like to see that as well. I know that was tough to do because that would pretty much tell Celebration of Art you can't have it Thursday night. But the fact remains, it's an art-related event in putting boundaries around it. Now, I agreed at the study session to put a boundary around it because I wanted to see it in there at some point. So if we can't have it completely, let's at least have that boundary. I would like to ask staff, is the language still in there that in the appeal process for the city manager, if there's something that business owners or the public has a problem with at a certain event coming up, that they can appeal it to the city manager?
Mayor Lane and Councilman Phillips, yes, there's still criteria in there for appeal.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm glad that's still there. And just to reiterate this thing about changing the dates and times, I'm not for that. 10 during January and March and 14 for the rest of the year, I think is more than fair. And I would even allow more than that the rest of the year because, you know, maybe events during the summertime actually help the businesses downtown, but certainly not during the time of the year when that's when their bread and butter is. That's when they make the money to get them through the rest of the year.
Excuse me 1 second, Councilman. Mr. Biesmeyer, did you have a comment that you...
I do. I have a correction. I believe that particular measure about appealing to the city manager is not in there in the ordinance. It is available in other means, but it's not specifically in that ordinance. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry.
The appeal is by the applicant. It's not
Yeah.
the people who are not.
Mayor Lane, Councilman Phillips, members of the council. So when Councilman Phillips asked his question, he asked if the appeal provision was still in there, and that is a section that did not change from the work study discussion. But when you look at section 2215, the appeal is by the applicant. The appeal, I think you've further clarified that to say that anybody could appeal to the city manager about the event permit, and that is not included in there and wasn't included in there when we discussed this with you at the work study either.
Okay, well, that was the reason that I think we brought up in the first place was because, you know, back in, when was that, November, December, when we had the pop-up tents and we came to council and I asked city staff if people could come back to the council and you said council has no authority over it, then I thought we agreed that at least the city manager would be able to do that. But if you're saying it's just for the applicant, it's kind of empty because why would the applicant complain about his own event? I mean, he's only going to complain if we don't give it to him. We want to be able to have a resource that if you give an event that the public or the brick and mortar businesses around the downtown protest to, they have somebody to protest it to. You can't just be able to say, well, we gave it to them, so it's done. And if it can't come back to council, it should at least come back to the city manager, and he should be able to make that decision. So if that's not in there, I think we should put it in there. Okay, so I don't know if that's a motion to put that in there as part of this ordinance, or to include it in this ordinance, or part of an ordinance for another time that, like the bridge. I guess that would be Bruce Washburn's question.
Yep. I mean, the process for that would be that what's before the council tonight is whether or not to approve the ordinance. And so the process for making changes to the ordinance would be to move to either reject the ordinance or to adopt the ordinance with amendments. But if you're going to make that kind of an amendment, I mean, that's a different ordinance that has an appeal provision for somebody other than the applicant. And I would strongly advise against trying to do that on the fly from the dais. If that's what council wants, we'll go back, we'll draft a procedure that has broader appeal rights. I'd have to say most permits don't have appeal rights for anybody besides the applicant, but that's not to say we couldn't do it.
Okay, I can understand that. So, all right, so I guess that in mind, sounds like you got pretty much 3 people in agreement so far and not changing those event dates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Cordy.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a question around events and in respect to day limitations. Are there today, do we have events that would be impacted by a 24-day per year limitation?
Mayor and Councilman Cordy, yes, the farmers market would be one example of that type of an event.
Okay. Thank you. And that's what I thought there was. And I think also the Cavalier Horse Show, although that was on private property, it'd be impacted by this too, because that was a good 2-week stint, I believe.
That's correct.
Okay. So in that sense, I have a hard time with event limits because I don't know about the rest of us in this room, but that farmer's market is in downtown. I'm talking about specifically the downtown garage on First Avenue, I believe, First Avenue garage, is an asset to this community. And our residents come there every Saturday and Sunday morning to buy those fresh vegetables and locally made goat cheese and all of those salted caramels and everything else that's a part of that farmer's market. So I think it's important for us to consider the impact of those limitations citywide. And in that sense, I would not support the limitation. Now, if there's some type of compromise, willing to compromise, but at this point, I have a difficult time with that. Number 2, the Canal Bank and Bridge separate ordinance. Completely agree that we should move that forward and separate that out, just as we do the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve or the Civic Mall, the other public areas that have their own special events ordinance. The user guide, I certainly want to see the user guide and have input to that, because that's what our applicants are going to see. That's what our merchants are going to see and what they're going to use, and it's got to be user-friendly. And shall we say simple? You know, we just need to make this process simple. 4th, is there a lot of competition for special events in Scottsdale? I mean, I know it's a qualified term, a lot, but I mean, is there competition? Do we turn down event producers because there's too much going on?
Councilmember Cordy, we have some event venues within the city that, such as Westworld, for example, or even our own stadium, that actually will turn away events because of their sheer size and nature and things that they can accommodate, that we do lose. Our city's special events process and procedures are really kind of at all the other areas within the city that aren't really equipped or made to do events. So I don't know necessarily that we're necessarily losing events because of the competition of people looking to request things?
So perhaps my question should be more focused regarding some of our smaller venues. So, take the bridge and the Canal Bank. Are we turning away event producers? Particularly since we don't have the artisan market there every week and now. So are there other individuals, producers, events that are clamoring for their opportunity to be in Scottsdale?
At this time, we have not had to turn away any other events or people looking to come into to the city, no. The canal banks, as you know, we do not market those as an event venue. So oftentimes the people that are coming to us requesting to use those as an event is more or less by word of mouth.
So are we seeing any additional event producers of unique experiences approaching Scottsdale to fill some of these areas that have been opened up because of the decision last year?
Mayor and Councilman Corti, no, we have not. In fact, this month we have one event that will happen on the Canal Banks, March 19th to the 20th. Remind me, Jim. At the Italian Festival. Other than that, there won't be any events happening on the Canal Banks for the month of March.
How about April? What's scheduled for April?
We have two events for the month of April. One is Viva. It's a fundraiser. It's the Women's 2030 Club, and that brings about 1,400 people. That's April 2nd. And then we also have April 23rd, the annual Original Taste, which is put on by the Executive Council's Charities, and that's also a large fundraiser where they give money throughout the valley.
So, but for the most part, could we safely say that event producers are not knocking down our doors?
That's correct.
Regarding fees, and I know we haven't talked about fees. Some fees were presented in work study, and I know those are still to come at a later date, I assume. And I think that will be a very important conversation. And I ask that when you bring them back, bring back what the market is can carry. So what the market. So Phoenix event fees and Mesa and Tempe and Fountain Hills. What is their fee structure, and making sure that we just don't overprice and eliminate ourselves out of the market. That's my concern. And regarding the Thursday night events and this veto, I understand this veto power is a misnomer. Don't mean to say it again, excuse me, but my concern about shall we say, this process, including only the Scottsdale Gallery Associations, I think is a questionable precedent that we're setting. I would like to see if there's a compromise there, that that process solicits feedback from all the merchants, all the downtown merchants, and including the galleries. For that feedback, for that potential conflict on a Thursday night art walk. I'm not convinced that we should eliminate all art events from the Thursday night art walk. I think maybe there may be some complements somewhere along the way. I just don't believe that setting that in stone is as flexible as we should be. I also believe that the area that this zone for Art Walk be as narrow as possible, whether that's just in the core of downtown. I don't think all of our downtown, from Chaparral to Osborne and Gold Water to drink water should be included. That is too large of an area, so I'm expressing my opinion there. And then I'm sure I have more questions as we go, but I completely agree with many individuals who have spoken tonight and some fellow council members that our downtown area has been neglected. I walk down there often, and for years, cigarette butts in the curbs and the weeds growing up in the sidewalks and dead trees and sidewalk benches that you wouldn't dare sit on. That's unacceptable for our downtown. And I know I've had some conversations with some downtown gallery owners and merchants, also city, and if there's anything that we can do on a more immediate basis is to move forward with a focus on bettering the hardscape, cleaning up the streets, having the appropriate frequency of street sweepers come through so that, hey, the sidewalk may be dirty and there may be some crumbling areas in that sidewalk, but at least it'd be clean, and at least we're doing something immediately and moving forward with a longer-term project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Cordy. Mr. Washburn, did you have a comment on?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This may already be clear to everybody, but I just want to make sure it is on the issue of veto power. The city can't give the Gallery Association or anybody else veto power over how the city interprets its own ordinances. That always has to be done by the city. So while it's perfectly legitimate to say that the city, which is what I understood to have been said, that the city will get their input on whether or not there is a conflict that would make it appropriate under the ordinance to deny an event permit for any particular art activity, it can't be determinative what their opinion is. That the final decision always has to be made by the city.
Thank you, Mr. Washburn. If I might just make an additional comment on sort of the progress we're making through on some of the suggestions, some of the thoughts, some of the exceptions, and some of the ads that we're talking about. We're not in a work study. So as far as staff is concerned, these are just thoughts and comments right now. They'll have to be framed up on either an amended motion for this ordinance or a request to continuance until the staff can bring it back, in which case that will have to be crafted in such a way as to say some of these items may be considered or may not. We're going to have to figure out where the council lies on that. So it's going to be maybe a bit more complicated than this confession status that we're at right now. So, but with that small little insight, I suppose, Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. Wow. Well, in general, I agree with what Vice Mayor Smith, Councilman Phillips, and Councilwoman Clapp have said in the way of suggestions. I have a few things here. I think I started out at the top and kind of worked my way through after I rewatched the work study session. I would like to keep the word special events. I think these are special events. That's what we're trying to find and work for and allow. And I think just calling them an event opens up a huge can of worms that I think we don't need to do. So these are special events. Along on that line, they're also unique and they're temporary activities. Some events are not that way, and so these need to be defined under this ordinance in that manner. I think all of the criteria in Article 2 need to receive permit approval. If any does not, then it does not receive the approval. On your items, I went through here on numbers, so I'll try and keep it so we can all figure out what I'm saying here. 22-4, event criteria. Okay, all criteria needs to be met. Specific measurements need to be found for determining a sufficient accommodation is available, especially when it comes to parking, movement, and spaces. This determination should be a staff responsibility, and so they need to develop a quantitative measurement so that they can tell yes or no. Is there enough? Is there not? We can't just say, yeah, I think there is, when we don't know. It's going to depend. How many people are coming to this event? How many do you anticipate, et cetera? I think that has to be something that staff works out. I don't like the term net aggregate. You can't measure a net aggregate. And I would like to go back to if an event poses a negative impact to a substantial number of businesses and residents, then that event is deemed to have a negative impact. And you can find a much better way to quantitate that than just sufficient accommodation or sufficient aggregate. So I think the other, what we started out with to begin with was better than what we ended up with. 22.7a, this is vital. It needs to stay to 10 maximum consecutive days, 24 days per year. I totally agree with Councilwoman Clapp. The later recommendation was to spread those 24 days into 6 per quarter. We might have a little leeway there for seasonal adjustment, but we need to make sure these are special, unique, temporary events. The location box, as described before when we did Osborne, Camelback, Goldwater, Scottsdale, that was not agreed on with a council consensus, and I think that needs to be removed. This should concern all of downtown. Actually, it's citywide as far as that goes, and it should affect all of our downtown area and all of the events that we have down there. It should also affect Old Town to some extent, and one of the concerns I had as I read through the ordinance concerned the sidewalk sales. I notice you have retail establishments shall not hold more than 2 sidewalk sales lasting for no more than 10 consecutive days per sale in a calendar year. That means 20 days maximum per year. And I know many of the downtown and Old Town stores use sidewalk sales as a very common thread for their advertising and bringing tourists in. And I'm thinking primarily of the Old Town, the Mexican store down there. It uses sidewalk sales quite a bit. So I'm wondering, does this fall under that part of this ordinance?
Mayor and Councilwoman Littlefield, yes, the actual number of days that are in this current ordinance are in the draft ordinance are actually in the current ordinance as the same.
So how does that affect these stores that are, I mean, I've lived here most of my life, and I don't think I've ever gone by that street without seeing sidewalk sales. They just are. It's part of their business. Are they grandfathered? For 23 years.
Mayor Lane, Councilwoman Littlefield, members of the council, I think at the end of the council report we note that one of the areas that isn't clear in Scottsdale is temporary outdoor retail sales, and that's something that needs to come back for further clarification. We note that. My guess on that location is that has had that stuff outside for longer than we probably had the ordinance regulated. So they're not operating under the sidewalk sale ordinance. They just have that outdoor display. That's an issue where there isn't clarification. So.
Okay, thank you. On 22.9b, find that. I think we need more specificity regarding timeframes and what information is required. And I know it's probably in the guide, and we'll get the guide eventually here, so we'll be able to read it. But I think that a reference note at this point in this ordinance to the guide or to wherever definition is listed would be helpful to someone who's looking at the ordinance. You know, how much, you're talking about a check here to ensure a packet is complete. How much time is sufficient to make sure you get responses back from people if you're sending out requests for is this a good, event for us and all that? I would suggest 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the type of the application. For a simple one or a very simple permit approval, 2 weeks is probably fine. For the bigger events, the more complicated ones, maybe 4 weeks, because you want to have time not only to send out the request for information or input, but you also have to have time to get it back, to analyze it, and to put it with the packet for the city manager for approval, to go totally with the entire packet. And that feedback should become part of the administrator's packet. Fees should be at current market rate. We'll get those later. Appeals to this should not be to the staff. It should be to the city manager. And I think we've talked about that before. I totally agree with that. It should not come back to staff, except for clarification, of course, and what an ordinance requirement is or things like that. Penalties for repeated violations should include a prohibition from attaining a special permit in the future, and I think that's good. There should be stated within the ordinance that temporary 100% retail-focused booths are not special events. I think we went over that with Vice Mayor Smith. And I think, where are we putting the Museum for the West on this? I notice on the one area where we have listed city permits that are, or city locations that are not a part of this permit event. We have city parks, McDowell-Sonoran Preserve, Scottsdale Stadium. I also think it should be Scottsdale Civic Center Mall on there. And should the Museum for the West be a part of that also, since it runs under separate contract and is run separately?
Mayor Lane, Councilwoman Littlefield, members of the council, the reason why the museum is not included in there is it's not the same as the other ones where it has a separate application and fee process for approval of that. It's in a little different category. Running that as a museum of Western heritage is the permitted use. So anything they do at that site is allowable under that permitted use. So if you go back to the event definition, remember one of the things that we're talking about in the event definition is that the event, the use has to be incompatible with its legal use under the property. So we definitely could include Scottsdale's Museum of the West under that section there, but it would be included for a completely different reason for the other ones. So, and let me just say one more thing on that. If you include Scottsdale Museum of the West because you want to clarify that its permitted use is not subject to the, there's a lot of other public and private uses in the city that are permitted to have events that also would already be not covered by this ordinance. So that's our thought process on that.
Okay. Thank you. I'll come back later.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I wanted to speak toward one of the speaker's comments, and I think it was something I certainly would embrace 100%, and I think it is inherent in this whole process and how we've gone about it. You know, at the start of this process, I think that there was a certain amount of real agreement as to what we were trying to fix and accomplish. So there was an intent to do just exactly that, a 23-year-old ordinance, and the fact is that the city wasn't charging for leased property in any meaningful way. There was no consideration for impact. There's no consideration for conflicts. Those are the number of things that were more or less left to the judgment of staff, but with sort of a wide open stance, a wide open field on that. So I think it's what happened though is we had a level of agreement until which time is the level of angst got increased. And Scott, I'm talking specifically about your plea and the exhaustive nature of what this has become because of that conflict that has occurred. Whether it's enemies list or whether it's various criticisms or labeling or attacks, all of it is just really clouded the field of trying to make progress on this. And there's as many opinions about this as there are people in this room, at the very least, and probably beyond that. So I'm with you with that, and I think that's an important thing for us to try to diffuse, because putting anything together where there is no trust and there is no sense of belief in one another on either side, or that there's conspiracies, that there's a thought that somehow or other we're not all pulling on the same oar. For people who are involved with art and culture, and art and specifically, who should have a high level, and I'm not isolating that group when I say this, of different perceptions and interpretations. I think we are trying to pull on the same oar, but we have different methodologies and different things about what we concern ourselves with and thinking. And so that's really what we're striking to do. And I hope that is where we'll go. So where's the balance on it? You know, we've got everything from no events to unlimited events. So we're going to find ourselves somewhere in between, and somebody's going to be unhappy or feel that they're not being represented somehow or other, and that maybe that amounts to a conspiracy. I hope not. I hope we're able to do better than that. The intentions at a point in time when downtown was particularly slow. I mean, there was points in time that they weren't sending anybody downtown from the tourism industry because there was nobody on the sidewalk. There was nobody around. When they came back, they said, hey, we're not going back down there. And so to more or less bring some life to downtown, some of these things were actually instituted as an attraction of some activity to enliven downtown. Whether that was good, bad, or indifferent, that's part of the conspiracy or the thought process. And it wasn't without some substance and foundation. The CVB, who is our destination marketeer, told us for the longest time, and frankly it's just been resubstantiated, that tourists are looking for these kinds of events occurring in the downtown. Now, that may be wrong, and maybe it's overflow. Maybe it's too much. I think that point was made that we may not have the capacity for some of what we're doing. So that's where I speak toward a balance. But what we're here tonight is we're either going to go up or down on an ordinance as it is, or we're going to continue it with some consideration for a lot of things that we'll have to delineate and vote on individually before we move it forward. Or we're going to consider and maybe someone will offer this, a amended version of this that doesn't get so complicated that as we try to amend something we want to agree upon, that it's clear enough in its terms. And I'm not sure that I'm crazy about that. I know most of staff's not crazy about that, because that's where mistakes get made as to what provisions you want in, what it's going to say legally, and how it's going to be enforced. I'm just going to say a couple things more about what I would hope that we find some balance, some measure of agreement and compromise on this. But one thing that has been of concern to me is that the compliance with the terms of any contract that the city puts together on a permit, and a permit is essentially a contract, if the compliance is there, the idea that we would somehow pull it back or stop it, if we agree upon certain provisions, criteria, call them what we may, if we agree upon those and those are complied with, somebody has a permit. I think Vice Mayor mentioned this earlier. One of the real difficulties you have with this is the subjective comments and how you measure compliance, how you measure even what your desired result is. It's rather subjective and it's difficult. So I'm concerned that if in fact we strike an agreement with somebody with a permit, I know we've even talked about other cities, whether they have a special events permit. People have permits to use right away. They do all kinds of things. They may call it half a dozen different things, but the fact remains that they do it. And how heavily or or how lightly they regulate it is really in the text of how they let those permits be given. I believe that the compliance with the terms should be enough to assure an applicant that he or she has a permit. So the appeal process, particularly and I think our city attorney very aptly put it, and that is there's very infrequently is there an appeal process that's given to a third party that's not part of it. This ordinance should reflect that impact of that concern with the citizens. And so we'd hope that if there's an appeal in process, it'd be by the applicant because he or she feels he's been somehow harmed. I think retail sales is something that has to be put into the equation, and how you measure it, if it is primarily retail sales versus not primarily retail sales. I think that's a matter of some judgment, and who are we going to give those judgments to? We'll get to something on that as well. As far as the veto aspect has been mentioned, personally, I'm not opposed to some consideration for the bricks and mortar, and I say some consideration. I don't really like the idea of putting it on as a veto, but certainly an accommodation for the bricks and mortar merchants, that they should have some priority position with regard to events within their bastion or maybe even their time. But if they're not using it, that's something else again. So with that said, I'm just to give an example, I suppose, on the one hand, of the event criteria items that I've said last time in the work study that I'm concerned with, and I still am, particularly since there's an environment of some hostility and some difficulty with giving anybody the say-so on these things, and ultimately whether they would even hold. But size and attendance and nature of the event is suitable for the location. It's a tough thing to call, but there is a judgment that can be made there by people who are professionally in a position to consider that. Can event traffic be managed to accommodate expected attendance? Well, I tell you that may become obvious to some people, but when it will become obvious is when suddenly it can't accommodate it because the attraction to the event far exceeds whatever they may have thought it would be, and thus then are they now in violation of the criteria, and thus are thrown out. Is parking provided the same thing to accommodate it? These are tough calls, and there's going to be a point where they're going to have to figure whether or not they're in violation ultimately of whatever the desired effect was supposed to be. Is noise managed to minimize the aggregate impact? I know we've talked about just the use of the word aggregate impact, but obviously that's sort of the combined effect. Can the event be accommodated with required city services? Those are just some of the variables, I think, that are out there that would be tough to quantify either on the front end or in compliance. So with that being said, I think the current ordinance that the staff has brought before us, now this is notwithstanding some items that will come later on, the guidebook and also the rates of the charging, and whether or not we apply some seasonal or location or other criteria to those things, which I would very much think it would be appropriate. I think we have got a pretty good ordinance here. And I realize there's some tweaking that could occur, but it's going to be up to this council if they want to do that or come back and do this again. I mean, maybe I'd sort of like to get it done with. I'd like to get into a point of some agreement, and I don't know when that may happen, but Scott, to your plea. I mean, I'm with you on that. And I actually, I'm at a position and a point, I suppose, that I will make that motion. I have to go find it first, but I mean, it was up on the board, but... And I don't know exactly where, with all the conversation, I don't know exactly where people might stand on this. But, so I might find myself out on a limb again, which I've been there before. But I'm going to make the motion to adopt ordinance number 4242, adding Articles 1 through 6 to Chapter 22 of the Scottsdale Revised Code pertaining to events and amending Chapter 47, Article 4, Division 1 of the Scottsdale Revised Code pertaining to the use of right-of-way. And 2, well, I'll take one at a time, so I'll see if I get any further. Right, that's my motion.
You're just doing the first ordinance.
Yeah. I'll take the priority to give you some time to think about it. Okay, the motion fails for lack of a second.
I'll second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I should have given
No,
you
I was
more
just
time.
trying to get my button on. I'll second it if we're just dealing with ordinance number 4242. I'll second that.
Very good. Motion is made and seconded. Do you want to speak toward it at all?
No.
Okay. All right, then, motion's been made and seconded on the ordinance number 4242 to adopt it. Unless there's any further comment, I think we're then ready to vote on that.
At what point does one introduce an alternative motion?
You could do it right now. In fact, it'd be best if you did. Otherwise, it'll pass.
At that point, I would like to introduce an alternative motion, if I may. And the alternative motion is to adopt ordinance number 4242 with 3 additional corrections. Number 1, my motion would reintroduce the word special as an adjective, modifying the word events in any place that it appears in the new ordinance. Number 2, I would revise section 22-7, parentheses A, which is the portion that deals with timing and duration.
No, I'm sorry. We're just doing with the first one.
Is that not in the ordinance? Articles 1 through 6 to chapter 22?
Well, we're talking right now ordinance 4242. I'm sorry, what was it? Maybe I was mistaken.
Is adopting ordinance 4242 adopting the entire?
No.
No, it is simply the ordinance.
Then I think I'm confused about what the ordinance really is. What are we voting on?
One second, Councilman. We have the ordinance 4242, and then we have the resolution 10381, which is to declare the documents entitled as additions to.
This is an addition. Okay. Am I allowed to go into my emails to pull it up?
Maybe the city attorney can clarify for me and perhaps for others the distinction of what we're voting for versus.
It's attachment 1.
Bottom
Mr.
line,
Washburn, do you want to?
Yeah. Bottom line, if you're going to change the ordinance, you should do it at this time. If you want to make like changes to 22-7A, because the resolution makes it a public record, but the ordinance itself enacts the substance of the matter.
Okay, then I withdraw my second.
I'll second it.
All right, now, are we all clear as to the distinction between the ordinance does adopt it, and that's adopting the ordinance?
Whole thing then, not just the ordinance.
And in that case, I still would like then to make an alternate motion.
Okay, but go ahead. And are you then going to include the resolution then?
Since there seems to be some confusion about it, yes, I'll just make my motion to adopt ordinance number 4242 and also adopt resolution number 10381 as presented in all cases with the following additional items. Number 1.
Well, okay, go ahead. Yes.
Number 1, anytime the word event is used, it will have the adjective special in front of it. Number 2, in section 22-7, parentheses A, which is the portion that deals with timing and duration of events, that the section be modified to read that an event shall not occur more than 10 consecutive shall not occur more than 10 consecutive days or 24 days during the year. The rest of the words that are currently on that section would be struck, and the following phrase would be added to clarify the 24 days per year, of which no more than 10 total days can be in any calendar quarter. My third amendment would apply to section 22-7, parentheses B, which is the definition of the art events that would be prohibited if they conflict with a scheduled Thursday night art walk. And I would substitute for the boundaries that are described, which is Osborne and Camelback Roads and Goldwater Boulevard and Scottsdale Road, I would substitute the phrase the downtown area. I think that is my motion, or my alternate motion, Mr. Mayor.
I'll second that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Would the second like to speak toward that?
You almost wrote exactly what I wrote on my pad that I would have made in a motion. So I fully agree with the things that he added to the resolution.
Staff has indicated, Brent?
Yeah, Mayor Lane, members of the council, we wanted to clarify two things in the motion. The first one being adding the word special. So what that means is we will add the word special more than 70 times to the ordinance because we counted it up and that's how many times we included it. We're fine with that, but I would like to explain the rationale behind not including the word special in there. The event definition refers to a lot of things that I think people don't necessarily think of when they think of special events. It also includes the sidewalk sales and the grand openings and events on private property that don't really impact anything outside of the private property. So we can include that in, but I just want to make sure you knew that the effect of that was that we would add it 70 times into the ordinance. Another thing to think about would be to think about what you truly mean by what is special, and maybe only refer that to those special events on city property that meet the criteria there that the council asked us to add that talk about those things that really benefit the community overall. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is on the downtown area, that is a suggestion that might help that be more defined is the council already by resolution has adopted the boundaries of downtown Scottsdale in the downtown character area plan. So if you just amended that to say in downtown Scottsdale as defined in the downtown character area plan, that would put more specificity around it for us. And if you want to see a map of what that looks like, we can put that up on the MO.
If I respond, number one, I don't care whether it's 70 times or 800 times. It's just a matter of ink. So do it however many times you want. My concern is that in omitting it, I think we have lost some of the character of what we're trying to attract with these events. Number two, I agree with you if there is a definition, and I think that's what I meant when I said downtown area. So if we amend section 22-7, parentheses B, to define the area as the downtown area as, and I lost your words.
Downtown Scottsdale as defined in the downtown character area plan.
I would amend my motion, and the second person can talk to that.
I agree. That was the boundaries that I mentioned in my comments earlier, which was, as I recall, from Chaparral to Earl and from 68th Street to Miller.
Mr. Stockwell, can I just ask the question, when you cited some concern about the labeling of the special and that it's inclusive of things that are not special, I think this is an interesting conversation in and of itself, but nevertheless, is there any difficulty with those events that we may not, are we applying now criteria to a lot of other, well, does this ordinance apply to a number of things that somehow are mislabeled now if we change this to special events? I mean, I don't see that there's difficulty here, but I'm asking because you brought it up. Is it cause us some problem of legal interpretation and what application of the ordinance applies to things that are sidewalk sales or grand openings, those things that you more or less indicated are not really special events as we've chosen to define them here?
Mayor Lane, members of the council, looking at the ordinance quickly, the grand opening, seasonal sales, special vehicle sales, sidewalk sales are all things that don't require an event permit but are reviewed, so I think we can construe that those aren't really special events. You know, the approach of staff and as we went through public outreach out here is really to try and get a sense of what truly makes a special event and define it through the criteria as being things that meet all those things, and then not having to refer to the word special event. But either way is fine with us.
Well, just as long as we can, those kinds of things don't necessarily have to comply with the same criteria, the same kind of issues that are within this ordinance. Do we need to make an exemption for sidewalk sales and grand openings and those kinds of things?
Mayor Lane, members of the council, I think what will happen is in the definition section, it'll say special event means an organized temporary activity or series of temporary activities held outdoors on public property or private property that's inconsistent with the legal use of the property under the city zoning ordinance and open to the public by advertisement or invitation with or without charge. And then it makes the comment after that, any reference to special event in the code other than this chapter shall mean event is defined herein. So, you know, as I'm thinking about it, it's just a modifier that through the criteria you go on and modify further. So.
As long as we can accommodate it without creating some additional problems for those things that are just events. Is that fair to say? I'll go with that as a yes. I've got a couple of nodded heads, but I'm watching the city attorney closely, and I haven't seen him move.
I'm just going to say this, Mayor. I have not thought about it from that perspective, and so I can't give a definitive answer. But if the other city management's comfortable with it, then
okay. All right.
If it creates a problem, I'll let you know. But I'm hoping that will not be the case.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor, may I clarify one more?
Yes. Yes, certainly, Karen.
And Vice Mayor Smith, on your motion, if you could clarify year by calendar year, so that we're very specific on that as well, please.
Are you talking about the 24 events?
Yes, 24 days in a calendar year.
It is counted. I was leaving in the word, well, yes, the answer is yes, it's calendar year. That's fine.
Okay. We do have the motion, or the alternative motion on the table as well. Do we have some further comment? This is changing quickly. Mr. Washburn, are you back up on top here?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I thought you're getting ready for a vote. And one minor clarification, and that is when you said calendar quarter, I believe. And I just want to make sure we're all clear that a calendar quarter would be January, February, March would be one quarter. In other words, it's not 1/4 of a year. It's 3 month, 3 month, 3 month, 3 month, starting with January.
That is right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Well, very good. Okay, so the alternative motion's on the table. We do have some comments, starting with Councilman Phillips.
I'll pass it this time.
Okay. Councilwoman Littlefield.
Just to make sure, Vice Mayor, this includes removing the box and including all of the downtown area as defined by Councilwoman Clapp. 24-day maximum, 10 maximum consecutive, or 6 per quarter. Thursday night, geography to include all of the downtown area on 22.7, where it says the Thursday night geography should include all that when consideration for the art walk protection. And I also would like, if it's all right with the amended motion maker, to include one other addition to that, and that is to reinstate the process for appeal and or review to the city manager if appropriate or needed. Because he said, they said that wasn't in this.
Whose appeal?
The event, the applicants.
Yeah.
They had said that they had removed it.
Someone else can't appeal it. City manager can make the decision on appeal.
Okay,
But the applicant's appeal.
okay, the applicant, yes. I just want to make sure that that is still in the ordinance.
Is it still, I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
It's in there. It's in there.
it is in there. We verified it.
Yes, it is in there. For the applicant has a process for appeal.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Also, the 6 per quarter was actually 10 per quarter. I just want to verify that as well in the motion.
24,
It-
6 per quarter.
It is, the language will, well, it's not 10 per quarter. It's 24 in total for the year. So it could hardly be 10 per quarter. An event shall not occur more than 10 consecutive days or 24 total days, of which no more than 10 total days can be in any quarter.
Yes. Councilman Littlefield said 6 per quarter.
I'm sorry,
So that's, Thank you.
All right, so then you're satisfied that that provision's in there, Councilwoman?
Yeah, as long as there's a referral process to go back to the city manager.
All right. So no amendment to that necessary. Councilwoman Cordy?
Thank you, Mayor. I really want to support this, but when we limit the number of days of an event and that eliminates our potential for farmers markets, which are events that are celebrated within any community. These farmers markets, they're going to go elsewhere, and our community is going to get left out. I really believe that limiting events has a far broader impact than we can possibly imagine. And I would be, so the limitation of events as written in the draft ordinance, I would be fine with that. It would be 10 consecutive or 24 total days in the January through March, and then no more than 30 or 48 during the rest of the calendar year. That would take care of our farmers markets and the time span that they are, that they set up every weekend, and that thousands of our residents, and taking care of our residents and what our residents are looking for, that would take care of that. So I'll just put out an alternative motion that in section 22-7, an event shall not occur more than 10 consecutive or 24 total days during the period of January 1 through March 31st, and no more than 30 consecutive days or 48 total days during the calendar year, unless otherwise provided in this chapter. So that's an alternative to an alternative.
But are you taking and assuming all of the other factors that have been lined out in the alternative motion and adding that provision?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the change.
Could you repeat that for me?
So what I'm doing is I'm going back to the draft ordinance as written in section 22-7.
With special events, the downtown area, but now changing this component here.
Just changing the event limit days as written in the draft ordinance by staff in Section A. Because the ramifications of this limitation are far beyond what we are seeing tonight off of this dais.
One second, we have.
Mayor Lane, members of the council, Councilmember Cordy. So another thing that we thought about over here is if farmers markets are the particular issue that you're concerned about, then you could just amend the motion that has been made about event limitations to say this does not apply to farmers markets.
I'm not willing to do that.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm not willing to do that.
One thing that is a bit of a question, I suppose, the way this encompassed the farmers market is by the expansion to the entire downtown area as described in the character area plan for downtown. So it's incorporated that and maybe other things that may not have any real bearing on what we're. But in any case, yeah, it dies for lack of a second. I wasn't to second it. Yes, Councilwoman Clapp.
Okay, I need a clarification. We had a conversation about this, Brent, because this was something that I discussed with you early on about how this might impact other events, and I thought you had said that farmers markets would be covered under a license agreement, so they would not be impacted by the events ordinance. Is that not still the case?
Mayor Lane, Councilwoman Clapp, members of council, that's still correct. So this ordinance does not impair the city's ability to enter into a license agreement. And so in that specific case, for farmers market, a license agreement could be entered into with terms that were acceptable to the city, you know, with fees and all the responsibilities of that applicant. That's something that could be done because it wouldn't be an event, that would be allowed under the ordinance.
This is essentially a business. So I think with that understanding that it will not necessarily be impacted by this ordinance, then we should not be having a lot of angst about farmers market, because it seems to me that, and you brought this up, in fact, under the work study session, you had mentioned that farmers market and food trucks could be covered by a license agreement. So if we vote for this tonight, that can still occur, and that would not mean that that would not mean that farmers markets would go away. We would just find another mechanism to allow a farmers market to occur in Scottsdale, correct?
Mayor Lane, Councilwoman Clapp, members of the council, as long as everyone understands that, yes.
I understood that, so I think that takes away the objection to the 24 days limitation for this ordinance, because we'll deal with those things like farmers markets and food trucks under a different licensing agreement.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Phillips.
Call the question.
Question, do we have a second for a call of the question? Second. The question is called then. So we have got an alternative motion, as is outlined by Vice Mayor, which reinserts special into special events, keeps the days of the year, the 10 consecutive days and 24 days of the year, and incorporates the downtown area as described in the character area plan. Is that correct? That's the motion that's on the table. Councilwoman Cordy, would you like to, did you have a final comment? Okay. Then we are then ready to vote. All those in favor, please indicate by aye. Those opposed with a nay. Aye.
Mayor, I did not get a chance to speak. May I have a few minutes, even though we've already voted?
Yes, you certainly may. I'm sorry. Did somehow you get lost in the shuffle, or?
No, I was waiting to hear for the rest of the conversation before I spoke. I could see how the conversation was going, but since you called the question, I did want to comment, even though we've already voted.
Okay.
This has been, yes, very painful and challenging for everybody, and it's really been quite extraordinary to me. We all agree on a great deal of what this conversation's all about, but we disagree very voraciously. And when I say we, I mean the 7 of us on the dais, I mean downtown merchants, I mean members of the tourism community. We all agree our downtown is important and special, needs to be preserved and promoted. We all agree that tourism is important. We all agree we want our downtown to be a place where locals and tourists want to come visit. We are all embarrassed at the story that says a concierge doesn't send people downtown anymore. And I think we need to ask ourselves the big question that says, why not, and what more can we do? We all agree that the city needs to invest in our downtown. And when I was sitting here getting ready for this conversation, when I look at the Gallery Association, City of Scottsdale is a big sponsor for the Gallery Association and the Art Walk, and the downtown Scottsdale website is hosted by the city, and we spend money to keep it up. And so, yes, we agree the city needs to invest. Do we need to do more? You bet. And to the question of what is the plan, you know, the tourism community is investing in a plan to say what more can we do to make our downtown, keep our downtown special and make it more special. I voted no tonight because if we've created an ordinance that says it's net neutral or net positive, why does it matter how many days we do it? And if we're going to exclude events that we might like to have, that causes me some concern because I believe that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. You know, my office is downtown, and I go out at lunchtime sometimes and go to some of the local restaurants or go grab a sandwich, and a tourist stops me and asks me directions. I give them directions, and we wind up walking down Fifth Avenue in the same direction, and they say, where is everybody? So I agree we need to invest in our downtown, and I think we all agree. It's really sad to me that a community that is in such agreement about the importance of downtown and the need to invest in it disagrees so voraciously and doesn't see that we're all really trying to go in the same way and make the same investment. So I know this conversation isn't over. This is just about special events. I look forward to future conversations about how we invest in our downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So we have, are we setting up to do it again? Well, I thought we actually did, but I suppose we had an absence there. But in any case, okay, all right. Yeah. All right. So we're ready then to vote. Those in favor, please indicate by aye. Those opposed. The same alternative motion. I thought we did too. Oh. Okay. There we go. All right. So passes 6-1 with Councilwoman Milhaven dissenting. Thank you, everyone, for all of the input. I appreciate it very much, and hopefully we can move forward in a positive vein for all of us and the entire